Hello and welcome to episode 317 of the Unauthorized History of the Pacific War podcast. My name is Seth, historian and deputy director of the Mississippi Armed Forces Museum here at Camp Shelby. And with me, as always, is my esteemed co-host, retired Navy Captain Bill Tody, former skipper of the fast attack submarine USS Indianapolis, Commodore Submarine Squadron 3 in Pearl Harbor, and many other postings. How are you this almost Christmas week, Bill?
Yeah, I'm not ready for Christmas, but leave tomorrow to go spend the week with our daughter up in Virginia. So, yeah, we got to get into the Christmas spirit.
Indeed, indeed. And we are always happy to welcome back our frequent guest and contributor and fantastic dude, Jon Parshall. How are you this almost Christmas week?
A little frantic, but we're making it work. The basement should be repaired relatively soon. There are workers down there even as we speak, and yeah, God willing, we're gonna be able to put the whole place back together just in time for my sister-in-law and sister to roll in. So yeah, it should be good.
There you go. Yep. The Christmas at the Paradin household will be low key, which I am very, very grateful
Yes.
for. My sister has to do all the duty this year, and I'm eternally grateful for that. So, yeah, exactly.
Yep.
So, before we get started, we want to ask you to like and subscribe to our channel. If you have already done so, thank you. If you haven't, please do so. And on with this show. As the calendar rolls into late July 1944 and Operation Forager continues to move along in its timetable, the next target on the map in the Central Pacific Drive comes into very clear focus. The island of Tinian, just a few short miles from the main target of Saipan, had always been a desired locale for Forager, and now with Saipan out of the way and Guam underway, Tinian was the next step in the road. Like Saipan before, Tinian was also part of the Japanese South Seas Mandate, in other words, Japanese territory inhabited by Japanese civilians. Fully aware of what those two things meant, American planners were under no false illusion that Tinian would be a walkover. Preparations to land both the 4th and 2nd Marine Divisions ashore would hopefully overwhelm any enemy opposition and end the battle before it became the bloodbath that Saipan had been weeks earlier. The last conquest in the Marianas, Tinian arguably held the most strategic significance as its large flat plain was a perfect building site for massive airfields that would house the aircraft that would eventually bring the empire to its knees. The significance of the capture of Tinian and the establishment and operation of its tremendous North Field would quite literally shape the future of the entire world. And gentlemen, I do not think that is an understatement. I don't know about you guys.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. Yeah, you can still go see the A-bomb pits to this day. I have been. So yeah, absolutely.
It is a unique place. So apparently now aware of the massive, and I do mean massive, intelligence failure that had befallen Americans, both Marine and Army, on Saipan, Holland Smith seemed somewhat cognizant of the fact that he needed to make a change in that regard. He was determined to not make the same mistake twice, or at least one would like to think. And we're going to bag on Holland some more in this episode, so just stand by. The capture and such, he deserves it.
I can rely on you for that.
Yeah, well, he deserves it. I mean, truth be told. The capture and subsequent operation of Isley Field on Saipan allowed American aircraft easy access to the island of Tinian. And John is going to get into this in just a second about the size of the place and the distance that it covers. And almost as soon as the field became operational, American aircraft overflew Tinian on a regular basis to obtain aerial images from which the landings would be planned. John, this island, I mean, it's a stone's throw,
Yeah.
from Saipan. It's close.
Yeah, it's only 3 miles to the south. There's a very narrow strait that divides the two islands. So yeah, you can easily see it. Obviously, good swimmer, you could swim there. So we know that there's a fairly sizable Japanese garrison there, and we are doing everything we can to gather as much intel as we can now, sort of in a last second fashion, nevertheless efficaciously, because we can overfly this thing. Our warships are, constantly surrounding it to check it out. The problem with Tinian is that most of it is ringed with either bluffs or outright cliffs that just fall straight into the sea. And so there are not that many good landing places. The majority of them are down in the southern part of the island around what's known as Tinian Town. But there are also a couple of super tiny little beaches up on the northwest shore as well, and those are going to become interesting and the subject of our discussion here a little bit later on.
So to talk
Yes.
about the terrain. Oh, go ahead, Bill. Go
I
ahead.
have a map here. Can you see it?
Yeah,
Yes.
All right. Yeah. So to your point, look at Saipan right here and
Yep.
Tinian. It's almost like two bits of the same island separated by a little bit of water. And then Guam way down here about 100 miles away. So it's a big deal. And then, you know, John's other point is that, I'm going to pull up this one. Little Tinian town is right over here
Yep.
on the southern of the island with Marpo Point. We're going to be talking about all these places as we go on. And there was an airfield up north that pre-existed our landing. And so these are the things that we're concerned about, we'll be talking about today.
Tinian is a little bit smaller than Saipan. It's about 85% of the real estate that Saipan is. So Saipan is 46 square miles. Tinian is 39. But the nice thing about Tinian is it's a lot less rugged. You don't have this, you ain't got no Mount Topachow sitting in the middle of this thing or other, there is a large sort of flat table-like hill towards the northern end of the island, but that's really the only prominence of any scope. So this means that if we can capture this place, there's a lot more usable real estate really than on Saipan, which again is why we covet this thing for building airfields, because there's a lot of real estate to do just that.
Yeah, the Marines described it as park-like because it was so flat in that general kind of central location of the island. And it is.
Once you get up,
You've been there. It's flat as a table.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it really is.
And the channel, like John said, is only 3 miles wide here. So it's within our artillery range. And we'll be talking about that too.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. The artillery that we bring to bear here is ungodly. It's unbelievable. So by June of 1944, it was estimated that Tinian had a population of roughly 15,000 Japanese, with some Koreans and less than 24 Chamorros mixed in the population as well. Defending the island was, as we have seen on pretty much all of these islands, was a mixed bag of Japanese military. This is Army and Navy. Excuse me. John, can you go into a little detail about some of these cats, who these guys were and what they were?
Yeah, so the basically the honcho that's going to be in charge here is a guy named Ogata Keiichi, and his 50th Infantry Regiment. That is the main infantry unit on this island. This is a fairly experienced bunch. They come from, they've been posted up in Manchuria up until 1944, before they were sent over to Tinian in March of 44. So Ogata is going to be the guy who's going to be in charge of the command. There's also a small unit of Japanese naval troops, the 56th Keibitai, which is a naval guard force. This isn't even really naval infantry per se. These are, I don't want to call them reserve, but this is a second line combat unit that is going to be under the command of a guy named Goichi Oya. They are nominally under the command of Admiral Kakuta, who we had talked about previously. Kakuta was the guy who was in charge of the land-based air portion of Phil C. He's the one that was relentlessly feeding bad information to Ozawa during the Battle of Phil C. Kakuta gets trapped on this island as soon as Forager started, and he has made a number of attempts to get off the island, tried to rendezvous with a submarine a couple of times, and it does him no good. So, yeah, Kakuta is now trapped on this island. There are a number of accounts about him. He is apparently a fairly unpleasant fellow, a frequent drunk, and a violent drunk at that. So not terribly well liked, but yeah, he's going to end up being one of the higher ranking casualties in this whole thing. The other thing that's go ahead.
No, I was going to say about Kakuta is that I had read, and I don't know, obviously nobody will know, that one of the reasons that some of his reports during Phil C were so far off the mark is that he did have a penchant for alcohol, and that there are theories that he may have been blasted when he was
Blotto.
doing all. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, but
That's a possibility. He was not a terribly capable commander, and there are accounts of that well back to the beginning of the war as well. So the other thing that Tinian's got going for it, these are sort of under the auspices of the Naval Guard Force, but there is a fairly healthy contingent of shore defense weapons on this island. So there are at least two free gun batteries of 6-inch guns. There are several more 140 millimeter, which are 5.5 inch weapons as well. A lot of these, and this is something that I was talking about in our notes, all through the Pacific, anytime you would come across a Vickers designed 6-inch weapon, and you see this even in the U.S. Marine Corps histories of this battle, they would say there's a British gun probably captured on Singapore and hauled out to the middle of the Pacific, and you see that sort of trope over and over during this war. Brother, it ain't true. Any of these weapons that were put out there on these islands, yes, they were British designed in some cases, but they were of Japanese manufacture. These are old secondary guns that were taken off some of their older battleships and battle cruisers, warehoused, and then used for shore defense weapons, just for this very purpose, for defending islands. And so there's quite a healthy little den of these weapons scattered around the perimeter of this particular island. One of them, and we're going to be talking about this particular weapon here in just a little bit. They still have one of them. It's actually sitting right out in front of what is now the international airport on Tinian. And I say international in air quotes because it's teeny tiny.
it's not.
It's not a big place. But yeah, one of those guns is still preserved to this day out in front of their airport.
So to that end, those 6-inchers that we're talking about here, exactly what you said. They're the most potent, I would say, defense that Tinian has.
Yep.
And they put up a pretty significant fight here, as we're going to see.
Yep.
There were a couple other forces defending Tinian as well. Stranded air and ground crews of the first air fleet. So these are the guys that are, I guess, essentially what's left after Phil C. And there's a ground crews too, and I'm sure there's some air crew pilots and things like that here as well. And in my notes I said they're untrained in infantry tactics, but they added numbers. And as we all know, it didn't take a trained infantryman to be able to pull a trigger.
Right.
And if there's Japanese and they're breathing air, they're going to want to fight. So they're counted just the same. I would feel anyway.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the landing. Go ahead, Bill.
Too, right? There are Japanese civilians on the island.
Yeah.
Yeah, a smaller number, and I don't have the exact number here. Yeah, we should have it in our notes. It's nowhere near as many as were on Saipan, but yes, there is a Japanese population here, numbering in low single-digit thousands, I believe. Seth, help me out, man.
No, that's about right. I want to say it was about 6,000 ish. 6,000 ish is what we're looking at in terms of Japanese civilians here. To your point, exactly. This whole well, I don't want to say the whole island, but a lot of the island is. We talked about when we did Saipan. We talked about the sugarcane and the sugar manufacturing that Saipan was, I guess you could say, famous for. Is one reason that it was utilized so heavily by the Japanese. Tinian's no different, and as a matter of fact, there's more of Tinian that was sugarcane than was Saipan, or sugarcane field rather, than was Saipan, at least during the war.
Again, because it's flat. Right. And I will say too, the other thing about Tinian is it's gorgeous. It is just your prototypical or archetypal, I guess I would say, sunny Pacific island. Palm trees, white sandy beaches where there are beaches. It's just a lovely place. So yeah, unfortunately, the next few weeks for it are going to be relatively stressful. Anyway.
Indeed. I remember there was one beach on Tinian, and I frankly don't remember exactly where, but the sand was so white that it was almost blinding. It was absolutely good. Small beach, little bitty thing.
Yeah, it's probably White Beach too. I mean, that's where we take our guests.
Yeah,
it's just gorgeous. It really is really, really pretty.
Yeah. So let's talk about the landing beaches. There's a bit of controversy, at least on the American side. Before we ever land here, there is some conversations back and forth. One conversation gets pretty heated between two of our favorite people, Kelly Turner and Holland Smith, and we'll get into that. Oh no, yeah, we'll get
Two
into
of the
that in just a
nicest
second.
guys.
Just kind old gentleman here.
Mhm.
So Harry Hill is a guy we've talked about before. Admiral Harry Hill. Admiral Harry Hill was in charge of the Southern Attack Force, and he is in charge of part of this operation here. Both him and Marine General Harry Schmidt. And Bill, I know you want to talk about Harry Schmidt and Holland Smith and how they came to be in their respective roles here in a bit, and we'll get to that for sure. They were unhappy with the initial planning for Tinian. Intelligence had identified only two beaches, one on the east and the other on the western side, as suitable for a landing. Both were obvious landing sites to the Japanese and the Americans, and therefore were well defended by the Japanese. Duh. If there's only a couple spots, that's where they're going to put their defenses.
Yeah.
Harry Schmidt preferred a plan developed by his planning officer, who was none other than Lieutenant Colonel Evans Carlson. We have mentioned Carlson's name numerous times.
Yeah.
The former Marine Raider was now on the staff of the 4th Marine Division, and Carlson advocated a landing on the northern beaches to avoid heavy casualties and more losses in already scarce equipment. And I want to emphasize that more losses in already scarce equipment. You got to remember at this stage now, we've already done Saipan, we've taken equipment losses, we've done Guam, and we've taken equipment losses. And now here we go with the third operation. So it's not that we're running out of material. We don't have there's not an infinite amount.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. The Amtraks are getting scarcer. That's kind of what it comes down to.
So with Navy and Marine Corps planners in general agreement, the commanders turned to finding out if these beaches that we just were referring to, now christened the White Beaches, were feasible to land 2 Marine divisions. And this is important because this is rather odd, but it's also fascinating at the same time. From aerial reconnaissance, it was known that White Beach 1 was 60 yards wide, with White Beach 2 was 160 yards wide. This is significantly smaller than any beach we've tried to land on before.
This is just a fly speck. When you, I was sort of dumbfounded, when we were preparing the notes, I sort of started going back and doing some napkin math, and just for the sake of our readers, when we landed on Saipan, we put 2 divisions abreast onto that beach, meaning. And typically the way you do these things is, if I'm putting a division on, I'm going to put 2 regiments up and another regiment's going to come in behind. But regardless, those 2 divisions went on to a landing frontage of 6,500 yards, okay? Which means that you're taking about 1,500 yards just to land a regiment. So if you look at White Beach 2, which is the biggest of the 2 beaches that they're looking at here on Tinian, that's 160 yards. That's about the nominal frontage that you would use to land a single company, not a division, okay? Right. And White Beach 1 is only 60 yards. Same thing, if you fast forward and look at Okinawa, I went and sort of did that as a double check. We landed 16 battalions abreast on Okinawa across 10,300 yards of beach. That's about 6 miles of beach. So again, it works out to being about 650 yards for a battalion, about 215 yards for a company. So you get the picture here. We're going to try to land a division into 160 yards. Doctrine says that this is insane. You just can't do this. And sort of unsurprisingly, Kelly Turner's reaction to this proposal from his planning officers is, y'all are crazy, and we're not doing that.
Exactly. And think about it like this too. When we're landing people, and there's footage of this stuff, there's photographs of this stuff. These guys are coming in, as you said, abreast. They're coming in waves.
Yep.
Hence, wave 1, wave 2, wave 3, and such. When the guys are going to land on these beaches, spoiler alert, they're going to land on these beaches. When they land on these beaches, they are going to be landing in columns.
Yes.
Not waves. I guess technically it would be a wave, but not abreast. They're literally going to be walking behind each other,
yes,
going up this damn beach.
And for the sake of our listeners, what we should say is we're not going to be using ships to deploy these landing craft. What we're going to do is we're actually going to load these things up on Saipan and then just churn across that 3 or 4 miles of open water from Saipan to come into these beaches. We're going to set up what ends up becoming a veritable conveyor belt that's going to run troops over from Saipan, do this hook onto these beaches, and then immediately scoot back over to Saipan and pick up the next load.
Some more.
So that's the game plan that Carlson and Hill and Schmidt are putting forward to Kelly Turner. And Kelly Turner just flat out says, no way, we're not doing this. It just won't work.
Right. Bill, you got the map up. You want to
map up here. And so the beaches we've been talking about that are way too narrow up here, White 1, White 2. There was the other one, that Carlson said might be suitable, Yellow Beach here on the eastern side. Kelly Turner's plan is to invade down here near Tinian Town, where you've got Red Beach, Green Beach, Orange Beach. So that is the plan that Kelly Turner forcefully wants to impose upon his Marines. And this yields a great conflict because the Marines say, we in there. And Kelly Turner says, you're going to land wherever I put you.
Yeah.
And it goes roundy, roundy, round. And so I'll let you guys talk about how that resolves.
Yeah, I am not a frequent defender of Kelly Turner, but I mean, on the face of it, you can see where he's coming from. That by the conventional wisdom, man, you can't land a division in 160 yards of beach. It's just insanity. The problem with Turner's plan, of course, is that it's obvious to the Japanese where the biggest beach on this island is. And of course, the majority of the prepared defenses and the majority of the troops that the Japanese have are, no surprise, clustered around Tinian Town and this southern beach, because it's just obvious that this is where the Americans have got to come.
Yeah, and exactly, that's 100% right. And Turner was in full belief that that was the only place that if we're going to land people on here, and we are, this is the only place that, it can only be here and it can't be anywhere else. So Hill suggests the White Beaches to Turner, and he's immediately, not surprisingly, rebuffed immediately by Turner. He says, not no, but hell no. Undeterred, Harry Hill, and we've seen this kind of thing before, but Harry Hill's pretty much, he's a pretty straight-laced kind of a dude. He goes around Turner and tries to circumvent him, which, as I put in the notes, he kind of takes his life in his own hands here.
Yeah, well, and understand that, Kelly Turner is a bureaucratic fighter par excellence. I mean, this guy has clawed his way to the top by knifing other dudes in the back and out in Washington, D.C. He is a consummate knife fighter. And so, if you try going around the back of this guy and he finds out, he's going to absolutely, he's going to castrate you. It's just, it's sort of a terrifying prospect, but nevertheless, Hill is like, this is the right way to go, and we got to do what we got to do.
Hill was so convinced that landing at Tinian Town or in that vicinity was going to be a replay of Tarawa, or Batio is more accurate, that he decided to circumvent Kelly Turner. What he did is he had two planning teams. He had one planning team operate as if they were going to land at Tinian Town or near Tinian Town, and he had another planning team operate as if they were going to land on these two other beaches, these White Beaches. Hill and Schmidt arranged for a combined reconnaissance of the White Beaches. The 5th Amphibious Reconnaissance Battalion of the Marines and the Navy's UDTs teams 5 and 7 would recon the two White Beaches and see if their desired locale was even a possibility. Bill, tell us about what happens on July 10th through the 11th as the Navy and the Marine Corps swimmers, frogmen, go ashore here. It's kind of a hairy operation here for sure.
Yeah, they are. So you got people, swimmers, but the Marines in combat, what we call today combat rubber raiding craft, rowing ashore. They actually landed on Tinian at the White Beach area, right? So this is, they get not only keep it secret from the Japanese, but they got to keep it secret from the Kelly Turner, from the admiral. So yeah, so they land ashore. They make their observations after some dangerous moments, including a contrary tide that endangered the UDT men's return to their boats. They swam back out. They completed their mission and reported to Admiral Hill and Generals Smith and Schmidt. A second operation the following night verified the earlier findings. And so with that reconnaissance report in hand, Hill once again went to Admiral Turner, taking his life in his hands. Turner would have been a good admiral in the Caesar's Navy, right, in the Roman Navy with his knife fighting. He later recalled of Turner, he simply would not listen, and again ordered me in very positive terms to stop all White Beach planning reconnaissance and issue my plan for the Tinian town landings, which had already been prepared. But this time, Admiral Hill was equally determined because he knows the way this is going to play out. So taking both his career, and like you said, Seth, and his life in his own hands, instead of returning to his flagship, he went ashore on Saipan, remember, only 3 miles away, and sought out General Smith. He quickly secured General Smith's agreement to the White Beach Plan. So now we're talking about Holland Smith here.
Holland Smith.
And then he sought out Admiral Spruance. Whoa, the commander of the entire operation and Turner's immediate superior. Here's a quick way to not only get fired, but get ushered out, Seth.
Yeah, it's ballsy. But
Yeah.
I mean, if the guy believes in it that hard, you got to give him props. I mean, I don't. Harry Hill's a good dude. You know, he's proven it numerous times throughout the war, and he's going to continue to do so. He's a good dude. He knows what he's doing. He probably should have been doing Turner's job. But regardless of that, yeah. Well, you said that before, John, that there were multiple people that probably could have done Kelly Turner's job. Harry Hill is one of those people for sure,
Right.
without a doubt.
Close and Connolly could have been doing it too. So,
Yep,
know
absolutely.
This. Anyway.
So Spruance is impressed with the plan. Spruance calls a conference for that same afternoon, which is July 12th, 1944. General Smith, Holland Smith, of course, is as anxious as Hill is to avoid the unnecessary casualties. And we're going to get to, well, I mean, not only does Holland Smith doesn't want to see any Marine get killed, but the 4th and 2nd Divisions that are going to land here on Tinian have already taken a beating from Saipan. They've gotten some replacements, but not a whole hell of a lot. And we'll get into the percentages here in just a few minutes. Apparently, Turner and Holland Smith have a meeting about this. And this, Bill, is what you were saying before. Apparently, both of them had been drinking. Both of them had started to get rather loud in their conversations, and it devolves into a shouting match.
It's the middle of the afternoon, and sure, I mean, Turner's been drinking. Whatever. Yeah. Right.
It was 10 o'clock in the morning. You know, it was like one of those scenes where he says, "You want a beer?" It's 10 o'clock in the morning. Oh, you're right. Scotch. So.
Yeah, I mean, you know, Winston Churchill wouldn't have any problem with this behavior, but it was a rather more aberrant when it came to the U.S. end, at least. So,
yeah.
So at one point, the conversation, as I said, gets very, very loud, and I have quotes. I have direct quotes from this conversation. Quote: Holland. Apparently, obviously, this is Kelly Turner says, "Holland, you are not going to land on the White Beaches. I won't land you there." "Oh, yes, you will," replied Smith. "You'll land me any goddamn place I tell you to. I'm the one who makes the tactical plans around here. All you have to do is tell me whether or not you can put my troops ashore there." I mean, that's
Let me
pretty
jump in here.
There.
This is pretty typical Marine talk where you're just the bus driver. You drive the bus to where I tell you to drive, right? That's the way the Marines talk about Navy. It might have started here, actually, but Marines still talk that way about the Navy, right? Yeah. Not when you're on my submarine, but that's another story.
Nice. I love it. Apparently, the argument went on and on and on, but Holland Smith does get his way here, which, as much as we want to malign Holland Smith, he pushes for the right decision here for sure, as we're going to see. Turner calls for a final conference on July 12th. Spruance attends this conference, but after the White Beach Plan was presented and with Hill's views already well known, Turner finally calmed down and announced his agreement with the White Beach Plan. So I think this is just me personally saying this. I think Turner realized that he was the only one in the room who was not on the side of Harry Hill. And he was fully aware that his boss was on the side of Harry Hill. And he's like, this is not the hill I want to die on, no pun intended.
Right.
That he decides to side with the White Beach Plan. The Marines would indeed invade Tinian on these two fly specs, as you said, John, beaches on White Beach 1 and 2.
Yeah.
Turner later said, and this I found funny, Turner later said that he maintained his opposition only because all the information necessary to evaluate the White Beach plan had not been compiled, and once it had been, he ruled in favor of it.
Yeah.
Or shit.
Right.
Not even.
One of the technical obstacles, and I forget if we have this in the notes a little later on, is there's actually reef right off of these two little beaches too. And so one of the things that the Marines had to figure out is, can we build a ramp that will let our Amtraks get up, the relatively steep escarpment that goes on to these beaches? And they actually built some jury-rigged ramps in order to allow the Amtraks to do their thing there. And they had to prove to Holland Smith, and I believe also to Turner, that these things would actually work. And so the Marine engineers were building these things and actually, drove an Amtrak up and down it like 100 times to prove that it had the structural stability to make it back off the beach. But, that and the results of the UDTs and all that stuff, it eventually all came together. And as you say, Seth, Kelly Turner realizes that he has a losing hand here, because again, if the big boss is in favor of the radical solution, and as we know, arguing with Raymond Spruance is just a remarkably unproductive thing to try to do, the eventual outcome is going to be pretty clear.
To quote you specifically, John, arguing with Raymond Spruance is like arguing with a refrigerator.
It's just
you're not going to win.
Yeah, he's completely unemotional. He is completely fact driven, and he just, that's what you get.
Yeah, just on this is, what Smith is arguing to do here is what a year ago in a different episode we said MacArthur said he would do, which is to hit them where they ain't. And so that's really why they were so animated about doing it this way. And the second thing, there is, it's a good trait of leadership to let your boss take credit for a decision, even if it wasn't his decision in the first place. It's one of those things where you just say, this is good. What a great idea, boss. I'm really happy. How brilliant that one was.
Exactly.
Good call, Chief. Thanks.
Yeah.
So I got ahead of myself when I was talking about the UDTs, but let's talk about the UDTs, because this recon mission that they do here on the beaches is, any UDT, well, I say any, most UDT operations are pretty damn hairy. This one is specifically hairy. This one's particularly hairy, actually. Bill, tell us a little bit about some of these guys, including Major James L. Jones, who's commanding this operation here. Let us lay it on us.
Sure. Yeah, the Marines today have Force Recon. They did then too. The 5th Amphibious Corps Amphibious Reconnaissance Battalion, under the command of recently promoted Major James L. Jones, in conjunction with underwater demolition teams 5 and 7, like we said before, were tasked with performing. And this occurred at night, this recon at Tinian beaches. By the way, I carried a company of Force Recon Marines on my submarine once, and boy, was that fun. It's another story for another day. This mission was multifaceted. They were to locate obstacles on the beach, determine the height and characteristics of the cliffs and the vegetation behind the beaches, determine the depth of water so those LVTs can get over the reefs, as John said, and the characteristics of the offlying reef, determine the types of landing craft that could be landed on each particular beach. Remember, these guys are going to be going in columns, like we said before, determine the types of vehicles that could cross the reef and move inland, and estimate whether the infantry could climb the cliffs without using ladders or cargo nets, because they'd have to bring those in. The plans called for the USS Gilmer and Stringham, APD-6, to transport the recon Marines and frogmen to the objective area some 3,000 yards off of the beach, where they would launch these 10-man rubber boats, what we would call today combat rubber raiding craft, or CRRCs. The ship's landing craft with muffled exhausts would tow the raiding craft approximately 500 yards off the respective beaches. At that point, they're paddling, and the boats would be paddled to a point just outside the surf zone. UDT-7 found floating mines. That was probably unexpected in the approaches to the beach, and a number of underwater boulders and potholes. On the flanks of the 125-yard wide beach, swimmers observed almost insurmountable cliffs
And they are.
that were 20 to 25 feet high, Seth.
Yeah, and those cliffs are straight up too. They're
Yeah.
I mean, hence the name cliff, but I mean, they are like that. They are straight freaking up. On the beach itself, the Marines were led by a second lieutenant by the name of Donald Neff. He discovered that the Japanese had strung double apron barbed wire. Neff left his men at the high water mark and, armed only with a knife, worked his way through the wire to 30 yards inland to locate the exit routes off the beach. As he crawled along, he could hear nearby Japanese work crews. At one point, he sees Japanese sentries peering down from a cliff overlooking the beach. They shine flashlights down there. Clearly, they could hear something, but they couldn't figure out where the noise was coming from or what it was. And after a harrowing time, go ahead.
I was just going to say, offshore also we have, an attack transport and
Right.
whatnot. It's not like they would not have been aware that there were American ships kind of cruising around here for some reason. So
yeah, and they've been, and truth be told too, as we all know, the American ships have been cruising around Tinian for weeks.
right.
So it probably wasn't necessarily an unknown thing, but having somebody on the beach is, so.
It's not strategic surprise at this point. You want tactical surprise.
Exactly.
They may know you're coming, but the exact point where you're going to offload those boats, they don't know where that's going to happen.
Yeah.
Neff eventually, after his rather frightful time ashore, swims back to his rubber boat. He is later awarded the Silver Star for leading Company A's recon team that night. So all this is to be said that the information that the UDTs and the Marine Recon pick up from these beaches proves that not only can forces be landed at these white beaches, it is a possible thing, and it's going to be difficult, but it's not going to be as difficult as Kelly Turner might have initially suspected that it would be, is what it all amounts to.
Yep.
So let's talk about the USS Colorado, because this is one of those instances, not to say that ships didn't take shore fire, because they absolutely did. In almost every single instance, they would take some sort of return fire. But there aren't too many episodes in the Pacific where an American shore bombardment vessel takes a beating like Colorado does here. And, for those who don't know, and I'm sure most of our viewers, listeners do know, the USS Colorado is one of the old girls. She's an old dreadnought. She had been somewhat modernized, to modern standards, but she is a shore bombardment vessel. She carries 16-inch caliber 45 rifles, so she can put a licking on anything out there.
I would say in her defense, she's one of the more modern pre-fast battleships. I mean, 16-inch guns. Let's recall that a lot of the older ones were sporting 14-inch. So she's a pretty hefty vessel, and she's been completely modernized. She now has 5-inch 38s as her anti-aircraft weapons, but she's slow. And she's not capable of standing in the battle fleet in any way. But she's gonna get a wake up call here this morning on J Day, the morning of the invasion.
Absolutely. So Tinian had been taking naval gunfire for weeks, on and off for weeks. When the ships aren't shooting at something on Saipan, it's like, hey, you know what, guys, let's go over here and go throw some shells on Tinian. And that's exactly what had been going on. With the invasion date nearing now, special attention was placed on Tinian's beaches. No surprise here. Inland defenses and known strong points. United States Army intelligence had detected a threat to the white beaches in the form of three, I say 120 millimeter, John. You say some of them were 6-inch guns that were in place.
6-inch. Yeah, it depends on the account you read, but my sense is that there was one of these. There's two batteries that have 3 guns apiece, and one of those batteries is up on the western shore of Tinian, and that it puts it within potential range of these 2 white beaches. And so Colorado goes up there and takes it out. But the one she's going to go after when she gets pounded, part of what's happening here is operational deception. We are in essence, feinting towards those beaches that are down in the south of Tinian. And as part of that, we are sending Colorado and some other warships down there to make a demonstration that, hey guys, this is where the main landing is going to be after all. So Colorado goes down here and comes around the point and into these southern waters and runs into a little problem.
Yeah, yeah, and exactly to your point, the Colorado was sent down there with the USS Cleveland and the USS Norman Scott. So this is a light cruiser and a destroyer that are going down there, and that's their job, is to not only provide call fire but to support this fake landing that is going to be demonstrated by the 2nd Marine Division. These two ships go down there, and with the appearance of an American battleship and her 2 supporting vessels off this coast, it's the Japanese do think, oh yeah, they're definitely coming here, and it's a legitimate, thought that, well, hell, then there's a damn battleship down there and
That's
they're
a
shooting
battleship.
us. Yeah,
Right.
they're coming down around here. So the 2nd Marine Division also, as I put in notes, is performing in an aquatic parade. they're in their landing craft, and they're basically going back and forth as if they are about to land,
Right.
and they're trying to draw Japanese attention away from White Beach, and it works.
Exactly. So
like a
we
charm.
do bring, attack transports down here. We load Marines into landing craft, and they are off those southern beaches and close enough that, the Japanese can see them. But in reality, none of those guys are actually going to be coming ashore.
Mm-mm. Shortly after 0730, lookouts on USS Norman Scott saw flashes from the base of a cliff behind Tinian town. Up to that time, no U.S. ships had taken fire from the shore. This is Tinian, obviously, I'm talking about here. Aboard Colorado, the fire support commander scanned the cliff bases but saw nothing to shoot at. Shortly afterwards, the battery of 6-inch guns swings out from cover and opens fire. And I mean, these Japanese, pour it to Colorado in a matter of seconds. I mean, they just unleash it on this thing.
Yeah. Well, and this goes back to I think it was Horatio Nelson that said, a ship's a fool to fight a fort. The advantage that a shore-based weapon has against a ship is it ain't moving, which means that its fire control is much easier to deal with than if you're on a floating, bobbing, vessel. So yeah, these 3 6-inch guns get the drop on Colorado and just absolutely shellac her. They hit her 22 times over the
22
next
times.
few minutes, and they put some rounds into the destroyer as well. And
Yeah.
they absolutely rip Colorado up.
They tear her up, and they tear Colorado up as she's pulling away from this demonstration. She's clearing the boat lanes is what she's trying to do, and that's when she starts taking this just shellacking from these guns onshore. Her side plates are penetrated twice, opening her fuel bunkers to the sea, and in short order she loses 45,000 gallons of fuel oil. And by short order, I'm talking like 10 minutes. It just dishes right out the side of her.
Yeah.
She's afire amidships. She takes a hit beneath her bridge. She's in no danger of sinking,
Right.
but
Yeah.
she's still taking a pounding, and her personnel losses are starting to creep up.
Yeah. I mean, to be clear, none of these shells are capable of going through her belt armor or anything
No.
like that, but her superstructure is getting ripped up real good. So yeah, she quickly becomes a mess. And we've seen this phenomenon over and over. This is basically what happened to South Dakota in the naval battle of Guadalcanal.
Yes.
Yeah, you can't hurt me with your 6 and 8-inch shells, but man, you can make a mess out of my superstructure and kill a lot of my personnel, and that's exactly what happens here in Colorado.
Yep. She has 11 fires that started in different locations on her superstructure or thereabouts. All were eventually under control, but the damage had already been done. Colorado suffered 43 men killed and 128 wounded in this one-sided shootout with these Japanese 6-inch batteries. And this occurs in like the span, I want to say, of like 10 minutes.
It's about
She
10
just-
minutes.
She
Yeah.
just takes a
And
licking.
you've got, 15% of your crew is now casualties as a result of this thing. This is not a walk in the park.
Yeah, it's serious. It's serious. And to your point, what you were saying before, USS Norman Scott takes 6 hits of her own from the Japanese shore battery. The ship's captain, as well as the OOD, are both killed. USS Norman Scott's captain and her OOD are killed from this return fire from these Japanese shore batteries.
Yeah.
As Colorado pulls away, she now opens fire on the suspected area of these batteries and just starts lighting it up as best she can as she's cruising away. USS Cleveland, and you've talked about these 6-inch gun rapid fire weapons before.
Yeah.
She just lights it up. And Carl Moore, who's Spruance's chief of staff, he says, quote, she looked like she was on fire, talking about Cleveland, with all 12 of her 6-inch guns blazing at once in rapid fire. But that is not what takes these guns out.
In fact, that battery, so far as I know, emerges, if not unscathed, at least with a couple of the weapons left in operation, because it is not going to be until 4 days later that the USS Tennessee, another battleship, comes back to the southern portion of Tinian to put paid to this particular battery. And the gun that you see out in front of the Tinian airport now, you can still see two distinct gouges on the barrel of this thing. I think that they were 5-inch hits that actually physically hit the gun, gouged a little divot out of the weapon. Well, you can imagine what happens if a 5-inch shell goes off in proximity to the gun crew. That's what puts those weapons out of commission. I remember taking a picture of that thing and sending it to our friend Jim Hornfisher, my late agent, and because I knew he'd be interested in that. And he texted me back and he's like, "That damn gun has American blood on its hands." I'm like, "Yeah, it certainly does." So,
Yeah,
but yeah,
it does.
4 days later, Tennessee comes back to fix its little red wagon.
Mm-hmm. And then she does indeed.
Yeah.
Bill, let's talk about the landings. And this goes into what I talked about, or John, and this goes on what I talked about before. This, Highland Smith wanted to avoid casualties at all possible, to these two Marine divisions, specifically the 4th, because they're the ones that are going to land here first. And these are the guys that were at Saipan. They'd already taken a beating, and they are already under strength.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are. The landing craft are coming from Saipan, not from ships at sea. The 4th Division Battalion's under strength because of their recent fight at Saipan. And the average strength is down from 880 men in a battalion to just 565 men, a drop of more than 35%. And that's the 4th Marine Division is going to land up over here. Writing in the official history of the battle, Major Carl W. Hoffman notes that the morale of the troops committed to the Tinian operation was generally high. This fact takes on significance only when it's recalled that the Marines involved had just survived a bitter 25-day struggle, and that with only a fortnight, he must have been British, lapse, as distinguished from a fortnight of rest, they were again to assault enemy-held shores. In other words, it was just a delay. It wasn't the 2-week rest period. It was a 2-week delay from the last battle. Their spirit was revealed more in a philosophical shrug, stoicism, accompanied with a "here we go again" remark, more than a resentful complaint at being called upon again so soon. Seth, this is pretty typical of the dog faces in the Marines at this point in the war. They know it's going to be, one battle after another until this thing is brought home.
Yeah, and I mean that's you could say the same about any division that's in the Pacific, any veteran division that's in the Pacific at this point. From the 1st Marine Division to the 4th Marine Division, it really doesn't matter. Each individual operation that comes up, those guys are going to go, here we go again. Here we go. But that's why you're there. Admiral Turner said he wanted the Marines to secure the island in 2 weeks, and at the end of the operation, they do it in just about 9 days. So this is definitely a far cry from Saipan, yet it is still a relatively bloody affair. Colonel Franklin Hart's 24th Marines would land on White Beach 1, and Colonel Merton Batchelder's 25th Marines would hit White Beach 2. Colonel Lewis G. DeHaven's 14th Marine Artillery would land its light battalions behind the assault troops, with its heavy battalions coming in later. Colonel Lewis R. Jones's 23rd Marines were held in reserve. So the first into this fight on these beaches, again, are the UDTs. under Draper Kaufman.
Our
We
buddy
talked about him.
Draper Kaufman.
Yeah, just one of the ultimate badasses of the entire war. Team 5, he's leading UDT Team 5. Their mission is to go in just ahead of the landing forces and destroy the beach obstacles and mines at the beaches, literally at the beach. Difficult conditions make this task very dangerous, but Kaufman and his swimmers accomplished their mission in spite of the tides and the surf. The Japanese had actually neglected to maintain these mines, and nearly all had been rusted to ineffectiveness. For leading this mission, Kaufman receives his second Navy Cross, supported from Saipan, and I know we're going to talk about this ad nauseum. Supported from Saipan by the Army's core artillery, the Marines moved ashore. The artillery support that is present during this operation is, and I'm going to bring him up again, Godzilla-esque.
Exactly.
It is.
Yeah, basically what goes on here is that, as you say, and let's nerd out here into orders of battle a little bit. So your typical 1944 era Marine division has 4 artillery battalions. 2 of those are 105s, 2 of those are 75s. 75 obviously doesn't have the range that's needed to do artillery prep across 3 miles of open water. So those 75s are going to be landed with the assault echelons in the initial landings. But the 105 battalions are back on Saipan. So both 2nd and 4th Marine divisions have got their full 105 complement sitting on Saipan. 27th Infantry Division, likewise, except for one of its battalions that is still up north, kicks in all of its artillery as well. And then there's the corps level artillery with 5th Amphibious Corps. They have 6 battalions, split evenly between 155 millimeter howitzers and 155 millimeter guns. These are the famous 155 millimeter long toms that have a range of about 26,000 yards. So those guns can reach all the way down to Tinian town and beyond. But the net result is that you've got a concentration of 13 artillery battalions, about 230 weapons, sitting down in this one little chunk of what is now the golf course that is just to the south of San Antonio on Saipan. That whole golf course was basically chock-a-block with American artillery and stacks of shells. So this artillery park has already deposited more than 24,000 rounds on northern Tinian, even before the landings go down. And it means that if the Japanese have to get out of their holes in the southern part of the island and advance to the northern part of the island in order to repulse a landing, oh gee, the entire advance route is going to be underneath these guns. Bad news if you're trying to make a transit.
That's just the artillery. That's not even the naval gunfire.
Right.
Or air support.
And I get, but White Beach is a chip shot for these core level weapons here.
Yeah. So the bottom line is the northern part of Tinian is just basically open to unearthly amounts of firepower on the part of the Americans.
And it should be noted too, when we talk about Saipan, or when we talked about Saipan, we talked about strange, at least for the Army, the 27th, a lack of artillery support. And there's multiple reasons for that. And I think some of them we never did figure out exactly why. But in this case, it's going to be almost constant artillery support, not just from Saipan, but from the naval gunfire too. And then when the Marines get their artillery ashore, it's going to be from those guys as well. And air support, because there's almost in every waking minute of a daylight hour, there is at least 2 Piper Cubs just lazily orbiting over Tinian, spotting artillery. So if something, like you said, John, if a frog jumps, it's going to come under fire from American artillery because they're under constant observation.
Right. Yeah. It's almost the World War II equivalent, frankly, of what we're seeing in Ukraine today. This entire island is under constant American observation, and there ain't a damn thing that the Japanese can do about it. They just don't have enough anti-aircraft weapons to brush away all of those annoying Piper Cubs and what have you. yeah, they're living on the receiving end of complete American air supremacy.
Yeah, the artillery is just unbelievable here. So, Bill, tell us about this feint landing that we talked about. It was executed by the Second Marine Division.
Yeah, that's down here again, where the feint is towards Tinian Town, Second Marine Division under Major General Thomas E., known as Terrible Tommy Watson. Great name, right? And he made a diversionary feint against the town. And remember, as John said, that town is even subjected to corps level artillery support all the way from Saipan up here. And, you know, the whole point of this is to pin down the real infantry, Japanese infantry soldiers who truly believed the landing was going to be here. And we did not want to disabuse them of that notion so they could head north and then resist the White Beach landings where there was really happening. So the feint was made by Marines in 22 LVCPs, served to freeze those infantry. That was the Japanese 50th Infantry Regiment and various elements of the 56th Naval Guard Force. As John said, those were essentially guys who specialize in guarding garrisons, bases, you know, naval bases or whatever. The Japanese commander, Colonel Kiyoshi Ogata, who John talked about earlier, was convinced that he had repelled an invasion. And he sent a message to Tokyo that his forces had turned back 100 landing barges. Typical Japanese overstatement during this all throughout the war. I think that would be fair to say, Seth.
No, yeah, for sure. Yeah, he does some quick multiplication in his head over the 20 or so to make it 100. But regardless of this,
right,
while he's doing this, while he's bragging about brushing away an American invasion, he doesn't seem to understand that there actually is an American invasion that is hitting those beaches. The 24th Marine Regiment is at that same time, or roughly that same time, hitting White Beach 1 and 24 LVTs. While the 25th Marine Regiment was coming ashore at White Beach 2. By 8:20 a.m., the 24th's entire 2nd Battalion was ashore, which is a rather amazing accomplishment considering the size of the beaches and the fact that these guys are landing in freaking column.
Yes. Can't run them in, disgorge, get back off, back up, get in the water, next column comes in. And you have to say that, we've done a really good job of rehearsing this, that our drivers know what they're supposed to do. And really from just a conveyance standpoint, the thing goes off basically without a hitch. And we're landing in the Japanese rear, and they're none the wiser. At least initially. Down at White Beach 2, there is a bunker. It's got an anti-tank gun in it. We still take our guests down there. You can crawl inside that bunker.
Yep.
And but it doesn't do too much damage, although I will say that on that beach, you can still see the differential and axle from at least one LVT that was knocked out in the water there. But by and large, our troops get ashore with practically without a hiccup.
Yep.
This is like a conveyor belt. I wish Reagan Airport's luggage conveyor belt worked this fast. This is incredible.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't state the success of this landing here in that real conditions that have never been done before.
Right.
Yeah. That's the
you
key.
Can't overstate
the key. No, you really can't. So by the time the landings have essentially been completed, the 4th Marine Division had secured a usable and defendable beachhead over the small white beaches on the northern part of Tinian. It remained to be seen if they could use it to clear the rest of the island, but as we all know, it obviously will come to fruition. Colonel Ogata is surprised, no surprise there, by the landing behind his main line of defense. He immediately orders a counterattack to push the Marines back into the sea. We all know how this is going to end. His only option was to drive them off of Tinian with a strong and decisive counterattack. He sends his 1st Battalion, 135th Infantry, with its own regiment's engineers to counterattack. Joining them are 1,000 airmen from the now defunct Naval Air Corps and some of Captain Oya's men who were in the White Beach area. do what Japanese infantry does. They come in at night. They do surprise some of the American defenders of this beachhead, but because of the fact that the Japanese had very little intelligence as to how many Americans were there, Ogata thought that he was attacking about 2,000 Americans, and there were almost, what, 14, 15,000 guys there.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and fast forward again to what happens on Okinawa. As soon as the Japanese come out of their prepared defenses and actually have to advance to the north to get to these beaches to put in those counterattacks, of course, we see a lot of this, even though, yes, some of this is going on at night for that advance. But the bottom line is that anytime the Japanese are out in the open, we're subjecting the front lines to enormous quantities of artillery firepower. And a lot of those troops don't live to make it to the point where they can put in their counterattack.
Yeah, and that's exactly what happens here. Literally exactly what happens here. They're outnumbered. They have no hope of reinforcement or evacuation. Ogata's forces probably knew, I'm sure they had to have known, that they were doomed. They weren't stupid. They could probably see what was going on over there in Saipan. They knew damn sure that they were not going to make it out of the situation alive. The soldiers and airmen come up against Lieutenant Colonel Otto Lessing's 1st Battalion, 24th, led by air officers wearing white gloves. The 600 attackers are blasted by the Americans, who are dug in, who knew that an attack was probably inevitable. Tanks of B Company, 4th Marine Tank Battalion added their weight to the destruction at dawn. Some 476 dead Japanese were found on the field. This is, I'm not trying to make light of it, but it's second verse, same as the first 16. It every single time this just happens every time.
Yeah, over and over again. I'm actually sort of impressed that we managed to get Shermans onto those beaches. I've never dug into the exact arrangements that they had to go through to make that happen, but that's pretty impressive too.
Because there's some footage, and if I can dig it out, and if I can remember to dig it out as a more appropriate thing, I'll show it here. And there are some Shermans. There's some actually flame Shermans on here. And there's some flame-throwing Shermans and flame-throwing Stuart tanks too, as well. Yeah. So there's actually a little bit of both. Yeah, really, that's nasty.
Yeah,
flame-throwing Sherman is not a pretty sight to a Japanese.
No.
Let's talk about this one guy here, Bill. Private First Class Cecil Tolley. He mans a machine gun with A-124 during this attack. Tell us about him.
Yeah, when the enemy grenades wounded all the other members of the crew, Private Tolley, despite painful wounds of his own, remained at his post, going through more than 4 boxes of ammunition and protecting his wounded companions. He would survive and be awarded the Navy Cross. Now, Captain Irving Schechtler, a reserve officer from New York, had commanded Company A, 24th Marines, since the division was first organized in 1943. His company had been attached to Major Garretson's 2nd Battalion, 24th Marines, for the landing, and his men had been among the first on the beach. He remembered, as I waded in, I turned to give some orders to my radio operator, only to see the poor guy floating in the surf. He had been hit in the head by a bullet. Schechtler led his company that night in the defense of a flank position against repeated attacks. 3 attacks came in, and each one was repulsed. By dawn, only 30 of the 100 men of Company A that landed on Tinian were still on their feet. Schechter received the Navy Cross. Later, some 500 enemy dead were counted in front of the 25th Marine lines. Seth, this same, you said it before, same verse, this keeps happening over and over and over again.
Yeah. And, again, we've talked about tanks on in the Mariana Islands. Tinian is no different, John. They've got tanks here. They don't have nearly as many as they had on Saipan or Guam, for that matter. But there are a few Japanese tanks here on Tinian, and they make an attack as well, and they get pretty well waylaid too.
Yeah, and this is an attack that, much like on Saipan, comes in the middle of the night, actually towards dawn, about 3:30 in the morning, and is trying to take out the Marine lodgements, and they just can't make any progress whatsoever. I mean, again, up against Shermans on our side, and also a fair number of people that have bazookas. that's a non-starter.
Yeah, Japanese armor does not stand a chance against any American armor or any American anti-armor weapon. They just don't. I mean, even a 37 is going to lay a hit on a Japanese tank and take it out. A reporter, and I could not find who, it just said a reporter, recounted, quote, "The 3 lead tanks broke through our wall of fire. One began to glow blood red, turned crazily on its tracks, and careened into a ditch. A second, mortally wounded, turned its machine guns on its tormentors, firing into the ditches in a last desperate effort to fight its way free. 100 yards more, and it stopped dead in its tracks. The third tried frantically to turn and then retreat, but our men closed in, literally blasting it apart. Bazookas knocked out a 4th tank with a direct hit, which killed the driver. Rest of the crew piled out of the turret screaming. The 5th tank completely surrounded and attempted to flee. Bazookas made short work of it. Another hit set it afire, and its crew was cremated." Unquote. The 6th tank apparently was able to flee the scene. So again, these American anti-tank weapons that are so maligned in Europe are just what the doctor ordered in the Pacific.
Deadly.
You're going to see it. Yeah, you're going to see it through the rest of the war too.
Yeah, and so there goes half of Colonel Ogata's tanks wasted to basically no effect.
Yeah, and this is his. It's not his only counterattack, but this is his major counterattack to try and push the Marines offshore. And we all know that it's just not going to happen. When dawn breaks on the 25th of July, a total of 1,241 Japanese bodies carpeted the battlefield, and it is believed that hundreds more were carried away by their comrades. Fewer than 100 Marines were wounded or killed during the battle. It's only the second day since the landings. The Japanese defense at this point, after day 2, was essentially broken. Without communications, Ogata had lost control of his forces already. So of the 3 Forager opposed landings, this so far, Tinian is by far progressing the fastest. This is what Marine planners and Navy planners had in their minds when they were talking about Saipan being a walkover initially. This is what they were hoping it would be, guys. And this Tinian is proving to be that very type of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Once again, once those initial Japanese attacks fail, as you put it very well, their force is broken. Communications are breaking down. Anytime they move out in the open, they're just immediately brought under very, very heavy fire. And so it's not to say that the initial landing was bloodless as far as the Americans are concerned. Clearly, we lost some people there. But now we're established ashore. And so then what ends up happening is all of those 105 batteries that were on Saipan are now loaded on LVTs and brought over, or whatever craft will carry them. And so now Marine artillery is being established, right behind the battle line. And we first cut across the island to the east so that we can establish a contiguous front line from east to west, and then just start pushing to the south.
And that's exactly what happens. And they're just pushing like a steamroller. Bill, you talked about the 2nd Division, performing their aquatic parade off of Tinian town. Now they come ashore. So now Ogata has not only the 4th Marine Division to deal with, Bill, he also has the 2nd Marine Division to deal with too. And it's just going to rapidly spiral out of control for the Japanese. Tell us about what happens on July 26th, Bill.
Yeah, and before I jump into that, I just want to kind of summarize that the difference here is that through, I think, 3 major factors, the difference between Tinian and Saipan at this point in the battle. The first one is the numbers of troops, the differential. We have overwhelming, we have mass is the principal war that we talk about there. The second one is the terrain, and the third one is the artillery support. And I can't tell you which of those 3 is the most important. I'm inclined to say the artillery, but the terrain is extremely important, and so is the numbers. And John, I'm sure you have an opinion on that before we jump into.
I was just gonna say, for the sake of our audience, that just in terms of force ratio, if you look at the forces that were committed on Saipan, basically we were about a 2-to-1 ratio in terms of forces against the Japanese there. Go down to Guam, the ratio is roughly 3-to-1. Here on Tinian, it's over 5-to-1. So yeah, mass is incredibly important. There's better intel, much better fire support. I'm an artillery guy, so I'm inclined to say that just the fire differential here is just is really kind of crucial. Certainly to ensuring that the initial landings are successful and making sure that there was just not going to be a counterattack that could possibly dislodge us, not against core level artillery being, called over from 3 miles over my shoulder. That's just not going to work. So
yeah.
Yeah.
And the fact that we made earlier, or the point that we made earlier, is that the island is under almost constant surveillance from artillery spotting aircraft, or well, I don't even want to say, I mean, it is, but it's also under constant call fire from the Navy and United States Army Air Force's P-47s that are operating from Isley Field, which is, as we've probably all taken that flight from Saipan to Tinian, it's what, 5 minutes, and that's in a Piper Cub, or a Cessna rather, as opposed to a P-47 that's just kicking it across that little bay right there.
Yeah.
Difference.
So
so now we jump over to General Watson's 2nd Marine Division. On July 26th, the 2nd captured Ushi Point airfields. I guess I'll punch in and show you kind of where that's right. That one up right up here in operations for the Army P-47 Thunderbolt fighters. So also on the 26th, the 4th Division climbed Mount Maga, which is right over here. And so, again, we're getting the high ground. Also another important feature here from the train standpoint. The center of the island and forced Colonel Ogata and his staff to abandon their command post on Mount Leso, which is kind of right over here.
Yep.
So it fell to the Marines with barely a shot being fired, Seth.
Yeah, the 2nd and 4th Marine Divisions are now, and they did this on Saipan too, and they did this to a significantly lesser extent elsewhere, but especially on Saipan, they're going to do it here. They basically form an enormous Civil War style skirmish line.
Yeah.
And they just move, and by that I mean literally like just line abreast of guys, and they just move down the island like a scythe.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I'm just saying it happened on Saipan too.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. In the aftermath of that Banzai attack. But this one is significantly larger in that this is a picket line of guys that literally stretches from, side to side of this entire island. And there's no question that we probably could have taken this island a little faster than we actually did. But at this point in time, we're far more interested in being methodical and minimizing our casualties than, an extra 2 days just doesn't really matter, because we know that this is the last. A, we've won the naval battle. B, this is the last major objective. Let's just wrap this up neat and tidy so that we don't have to deal with a lot of behind the line stragglers and holdouts and that kind of stuff too. We're going to be building airfields here soon.
And that's something you do not hear about on Tinian that you do hear about on Saipan, and then you do hear about on Guam, is that, the Japanese are infamous. We pass up a position, and then 10 minutes later, that position that was unoccupied is now, spitting fire from a Nambu. That does not happen. I'm not saying it didn't happen. I'm just saying it didn't happen with nearly the rapidity that it happened elsewhere on Tinian, because of this skirmish line that just crushes everything in its path from coast to coast. They kill everything that's moving.
And part of that, again, is due to the terrain as well. The terrain in the northern part of the island is extremely flat. There are some areas in the very southern peninsula that sticks down there that are much more rugged and hilly, and there were some holdouts that would end up there. Yeah, you can see it very well on the map there. The terrain shading lets you know what kind of terrain it is there. But yeah, by and large, there just aren't going to be the kind of holdouts that you had in a place in Guam, because there just ain't any place to hide on this island except in that final peninsula that's down in the south.
I found this to be rather humorous. After the battle, Major General Clifton Cates, one of the more famous Marines in Marine Corps history, was asked how he spurred on his 4th Division troops. He said he told them, quote, "Now look here, men. The island of Maui is waiting for us. See those ships out there? The quicker you get this over with, the quicker we'll be back there. They almost ran over that island," unquote.
Something of an exaggeration, because this division is going to be in combat yet again, and they're not going back to no Maui. But yeah, in any case.
Maui.
Yeah.
So Colonel Franklin A. Hart's 24th Marines was given the task of taking Tinian town. This is where theoretically the heaviest Japanese defenses were going to be. They were assisted by the division's artillery battalions, plus the offshore fire of cruisers and destroyers, which is constant. It's ever present. When the supporting fires lifted, the 24th 1st Battalion moved out, only to be hit by heavy fire coming from caves along the town's northern coast. This was quickly squelched by flame-throwing tanks. These are the Shermans and the Stuarts that we talked about. Engineers then sealed the mouths of the caves with explosives. Tinian town took an absolute pounding from naval gunfire, from Corps artillery, from airstrikes. It was pretty much a ghost town by the time the Marines roll through there, John. It's not much of a town to begin with, but there was nothing left.
It was nothing left by the end of this particular campaign. And I'll say too, yeah, Tinian town now is not all that large either.
No.
And has continued to have its share of hard blows. Tinian got just mowed down by a Category 5 typhoon about 4 or 5 years ago. And when we went back, our favorite restaurant was gone, and the whole place was covered with blue tarps on all the roofs. So yeah, this Tinian town is kind of a hard luck sort of place, and at no point harder luck than at the end of this particular campaign. It's just absolutely leveled.
Major General Schmidt, Harry Schmidt, commander of the Marine Force on Tinian, issued an order late on the afternoon of the 30th July, calling on the 2 divisions to drive all the way to the southeastern coastline, seize all territory remaining in enemy hands, and, quote, annihilate the opposing Japanese. As I put in the notes, it was an easier order to give than it was to execute. As we all know, the Japanese, when they're cornered, they generally tie in inside of these caves or inside of defensive positions, and they just hold out until you dig them out with a dang spoon. And that's exactly what happens here. There's about 500 guys from the 56th Naval Guard Force and up to 1,800 troops of the 50th Infantry Regiment in the southeastern corner of the island. That's where these get, to your point, what you were saying just a minute ago, John, that's where these guys are tied in. And that one last bit of terrain feature that's down there on the southern end of Tinian. And it's some pretty rugged terrain. All the terrain on Tinian, this is easily the most rugged and nastiest place.
Yeah, for sure. We take our guests down there as well. There's a set of cliffs that overlook the sea, and there are cliffs inland that overlook that overlook. And they're a good 100, 150 feet tall, and there are a lot of caves inside them. And to this day, so there was a group of Japanese troops down there. They hold out to the end. Admiral Kakuta is probably up in one of those caves someplace. His body is never recovered because his staff buries him up there, and they never let anybody know where they buried him. But they still find human remains up in those caves even to the present day. That's the logical last kind of holdout place on this island.
Yeah. And we bring in our artillery here, and we bring in the naval artillery too. Battleships Tennessee and California, both 14-inch gun ships, and the cruisers Louisville, Montpelier, and Birmingham add their voices for a 75-minute bombardment of naval artillery, pausing only long enough to allow a 40-minute strike on the enemy's positions by 126 P-47s, B-25s, and carrier-based Avenger torpedo bombers. That's a whole lot of ordnance being dropped in this one area to get these last bit of guys out of here. And it's important to note something we didn't talk about, but we need to address it here, is this is one of, not the first, but it's one of the first instances in which we unleash napalm.
Yeah.
This is and we can show footage of this stuff. Or I'll show footage of a napalm going off. Everybody knows what that looks like, but this is a particularly nasty, nasty little device that we're going to use really large scale for the first time here, and you're going to see it for the rest of the war, especially on Peleliu. But we're going to see a lot of it here. But this is a nasty thing, napalm here.
Yeah, not only does it can burn you to death, but it also can suffocate you too.
Yeah.
It causes extremely rapid burning. Source of fire just sucks all the oxygen out. So if you hit the mouth of a cave with napalm, man, it'll suck all the oxygen right out of the cave, and you'll suffocate to death. So it's nasty stuff, gelling gasoline.
We're going to launch napalm strikes on mainland Japan out of Tinian eventually as well.
Yeah, and we use a lot of it on Iwo Jima as well, and Okinawa. So
a Marine historian noted, quote, the planes dropped 69 tons of explosives before the offshore gunfire resumed for another 35 minutes. All told, the battleships and cruisers fired approximately 615 tons of shells at their targets. Artillerymen of the 10th Marines fired 5,000 rounds during the night. 14th Marines fired another 2,000. The effect, one prisoner said, was, quote, almost unbearable. Yeah, I guess so. I mean, that's a constant rain of artillery fire. And again, this goes back to what we're saying, this in just massive projection of American firepower in terms of artillery is ridiculous here on Tinian.
And unfortunately, of course, a number of the Japanese civilians on this island are now trapped with the remaining military forces here too. So, as is typical in these campaigns, the civilian casualties are going to mount steadily the closer to the end of this campaign that we get to. It's not a good situation for them at all.
No, and let's talk about that very briefly. I don't want to get into it like we did on Saipan because I don't think any of us have that in us right now, especially before Christmas.
The bottom line is that there's sort of another little miniature version of what we saw on the cliffs back up in Saipan that occurs here on some of the cliffs in the south eastern portion of Tinian. That we do have civilians taking their lives, jumping off of the cliffs, in some cases killing themselves with grenades and that sort of thing. But in terms of the relative percentage of the Japanese civilian population that dies here, it is not as significant as was the case on Saipan.
No, the numbers certainly aren't there, but the brutality is. And I had this in the notes too. The Japanese soldiers pushed some civilians off the cliffs, and that is a documented fact. And then two, that the Japanese army or let me just say Japanese military, we don't know if it's army or navy, often forced civilians to run in front of them as they attacked, as they launched an attack towards American positions. So these people, in a sense, would soak up the bullets before they'd hit the Japanese military. So same kind of thing that happened on Saipan, and it's going to happen again on Okinawa too, for that matter.
Yes, human shields, using civilians as human shields. It's just, again, the Japanese army is a terrible army.
Yep. So the operation for Tinian, the fight for Tinian, as we said, lasts about 9 days. And to your point, John, it probably could have lasted a 2-3 days.
We probably could have done it in 5, honestly,
Yeah.
if we had really put the pedal to the metal. But again, 2nd and 4th Marine divisions are already beaten up. The terrain is such that it allows us to be methodical if we want to be. And yeah, just for the sake of minimizing casualties, and it just doesn't make any sense to try to race and take this place. 9 days is fine.
Yeah.
The CBs can wait. So.
Yeah. Bill, give us the butcher's bill on Tinian here.
Yeah, on our side, it was 328 killed and 1,571 wounded, 2 medals of honor, additional Navy crosses were ordered to Navy and Marine participants, having been outflanked by the unexpected landings at White Beach as Ogata's men. Their prepared defenses now facing the wrong way and useless, reverted to cave warfare. And though they had a perfect defensive position on those cliffs in the southeast, as we've said repeatedly here, it made it hard for the tanks to go up the steep inclines. So they were resorting to occasional counterattacks. As always, such fighting was deadly to the attacking Marines. It was equally deadly and unproductive to the defenders, as over 9,000 Japanese soldiers and sailors fell defending the island. Seth, it's an incredible number with a kill ratio of about 27-1.
Yeah.
Think about that for a second. 27-1 kill ratio. That is incredible.
Yeah, you're not going to see that again. Not for the duration of this war, frankly.
No.
It just goes to show you, what the element of tactical surprise will do for you. That unhinging their defenses by landing behind them really paid huge dividends in terms of the casualty ratio. Although, okay, so just to grind numbers here a little bit, yeah, Tinian is one of the most successful operations that we launched during the entire war. So in terms of overall casualties for the American force as a whole, it's only about 4.6%, as opposed to Saipan was about 17.3 and Guam was around 19 of our landing forces ended up casualties. Only 0.8% of our force was KIA, as opposed to between 4 and 5% on both of those other fights. So yeah, a much better operation, just all the way around in terms of getting on shore cleanly and then running the enemy to ground and destroying them.
Yeah. And I mean, it was a setup for success from the get-go. You put in the notes, you know, the excellent intel, brilliant landing scheme, outnumbering the Japanese 5-1, and again, we've said it all episode, the absolute continuous artillery fire support and just pummeling that
Yeah.
this place takes is the reason for victory. And the thing we got to get into, and without going into too much depth, is the significance that Tinian is going to play. We all know the atom bombs were, you know, they were loaded and the Enola Gay boxcar took off from Tinian. But Tinian is arguably, I don't really think it's arguable, of the three Mariana Islands that we take, Guam, Saipan, and Tinian, this is by far the most strategically
Absolutely.
valuable island that we take.
Absolutely. And, you know,
Because
just because of the terrain and what we end up putting on it, you know, I don't want to steal James Scott's thunder if he comes on and is talking about B-29s, but, you know, basically we take Tinian and we just turn it into a gigantic airfield. Northfield
Mhm.
has 4 8,500-foot runways. The northern end of the island, there's going to be, I forget what the exact name of the field is that's in the southern part. That's now the international airport. But the southern airfield will have another 2 runways of that length. Saipan and Guam between them only have that many runways, if. So the entire island, within relatively short order, there are 50,000 American servicemen sitting on that island, most of them construction workers. I forget the million cubic yards of coral that end up getting used for the construction of these airfields. They also demolish most of the mountain that was in the center north of that island. Just gets kind of leveled off because we need that real estate. So, I mean, we move in here big time and just transform this island into an enormous airbase. When Northfield is fully up and running by the beginning of 1945, it is going to be the largest airfield on planet Earth. And you just think about, you know, the sheer logistics to not only keep 50,000 people in supply, but a few hundred B-29s that,
Yeah.
forget how many gallons of gasoline one of those puppies runs per mission. It's something like 14,000 gallons of gasoline or something like that. You know, and we've got 300 or 400 of those aircraft at the height of the operation. So yeah, this is really the linchpin of the strategic bombing campaign that's going to be unleashed against Japan. The heart of that animal is right here on Tinian, simply because the terrain makes it possible.
Yeah, absolutely. There's no doubt. And the fact that we turn, and we talked about this last week when we did Guam, the fact that we turn this thing around so fast
Yeah.
and get things built up and running and moving. I mean, this ends in the middle of August and ish. And
Yeah, and
and we're
we're moving B-29s in there. I believe the first ones come in October. We're
yeah,
running our first mission starting November.
November. Yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, things are not fully up and running by that point in time. But, you know, we're certainly capable of basing aircraft there. I think the first ones actually come into Saipan because that was the first island that was taken. But again, Tinian is going to be the big base here. It's sort of amusing. The guy who was in charge of the construction on this island thought that it kind of looked like a little like Manhattan, and so he named all of the streets on the island after, you know, things that you would find on Manhattan, and those street names are still in use today. The other thing I'd say too is that, man, crushed coral makes a hell of a good airfield. You can still land aircraft on runways Able and Baker on North Field. You need a plane that is rough field capable and doesn't mind a little foreign debris, you know, now and again. But you know, the fact that after 80 years you can still even just drive a car on those things is somewhat remarkable. These were really robustly built airfields.
Yeah, I mean, they're still, to your point, they're still in very good shape. If they went in there and cleared some of the growth that has started to take over some spots,
Well, newsflash, they are.
oh,
Uh,
okay.
yeah, I believe the northernmost of the two runways at the international airport, which is in the south of Tinian, that is being recommissioned as a military capable airstrip
Yeah.
because what's happening in the Pacific. We haven't talked about Peleliu, but when I was in Peleliu in March, gee whiz, there's a marine construction unit down there that is recommissioning the airfield on Peleliu so that there will be, we're just building a whole network of air bases around in the Pacific to use as divert strips and that sort of thing
Mm,
in the current political environment. So
mm,
anyway,
goodness.
yeah,
It's scary stuff when you really think about it.
yeah.
What I was going to throw in there, Seth, is that, we are going to be talking about taking islands of what we could say in perfect hindsight, questionable strategic value going forward. Peleliu, one can make an argument that Iwo Jima might fit that category. Nobody could argue that Tinian was of questionable strategic value. It's with the entire air campaign and the shock and awe in the Pacific War at this point, 1-2 punches are going to be the starvation of the submarines that they impose on Japan and the punishment that the strategic air campaign imposed. That's the 1-2 punch
Yeah.
for the Pacific. So, and most 90%-ish, you probably have a bit more accurate number than I do, John, of that strategic air campaign is driven off of this island. It's the place where,
I'd say it's roughly half, but no, you're absolutely right that yeah, it is the linchpin of this whole thing. The other
yeah.
portion of that 1-2
Mhm.
punch, and I don't know if you guys are going to be doing an episode on that. It's not necessarily even the aerial destruction that the B-29s rain down. It's also the mining campaign
Mm,
that the B-29s carry out. You talk about starvation, that's
yep.
that's the exact name that we used for it. And all of those planes are flying out of the Marianas as well.
Yep.
So,
Yep. Yawata, mining the waters off Yawata. That was a huge thing. Huge
yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
No,
Curtis LeMay's that if we lose this war, I'll be tried as a war criminal. Most of that activity occurs out of Tinian.
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, this is going to be Curtis LeMay's headquarters here, and they're not.
Yeah.
At first, it's going to be Haywood Hansel's headquarters for the first few months of this thing. But yeah, eventually Curtis LeMay is going to be living here too. So
Old iron ass, as they called it.
yes, that's right.
Yeah.
Teaser alert.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah.
well, this has been great fun.
Indeed. Indeed. Does anybody have anything else they want to say before we wrap this sucker up on Tinian?
Mm-mm.
And therefore close out
Okay.
Forager, by the way. We've devoted a lot of episodes to Forager.
Yeah, we have.
Because it's worth it, though. I mean, it needed to be highlighted in the way that we did, because this is the critical, and it's not a turning point by any means, but in a way you can look at it that the war took on an absolute, just abject destruction path from here to the end of the war.
Yeah, this is the pivotal campaign of all of 1944. This sets up everything that's going to happen to the end of the year. I guess the last thing I would say though is go visit Tinian
Yeah.
if you have the ability. It's a lovely place, and go to our favorite lunch stop, the JC Cafe on Tinian. We always joke that we're going to take you to the best restaurant on Tinian, and JC Cafe. I don't want to say it's the only restaurant, but we love going there. It's classic burger plus Chinese plus PBR kind of joint, and it's just, again, much like you find throughout the Marianas, the people of Tinian are just absolutely lovely. It's the same on
Yes.
Saipan. It's the same on Guam. If you ever, think about going on a sort of an exotic holiday to a place that's got some war history too, Tinian's a great place to visit.
It is. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
Absolutely beautiful. Well, with that, we want to thank you very much for listening in on our conversation. Please subscribe to the Unauthorized History of the Pacific War podcast wherever you receive your podcast. Give us a rating and review. Send us an email or a question or a comment if you so desire to unauthorizedpacificpodcast@gmail.com. Once again, my name is Seth Parrott, and I want to thank you very much for watching and or listening. Jon, thank you for being with us through all these Forager episodes. It's always lovely to have you. It's been great fun, and we will definitely see you again in the future.
Hope so. Yeah,
Yeah.
this was a great time. Thanks so much.
Absolutely.
Your
Bill.
viewers used to seeing you, Jon. They keep asking, when's Jon going to come back? Yep. And I'm Bill Tody. See you again next week.